The Catch a Break podcast is the insider's guide to breaking into and navigating the entertainment industry. Project Greenlight is about the making of an independent film by an emerging director. On season 4 of Catch a Break, these two shows meet. We'll talk to the producers, director, the cast, the department heads to hear what it was really like.
Those people had to not only sign up to do a low-budget indie movie, but had a camera and mic in their face while doing it.
Hear what really happened behind the scenes of the behind the scenes on Catch a Break, wherever you get your podcasts. That season of Catch a Break drops on July 13th, so mark your calendars. But right now, you're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Oliver. You can find me and my consulting work at julieharrisoliver.com. You can find the podcast at theother50percent.com, all spelled out in letters, as well as on all the podcast places. Or you can find links to everything I'm doing at the link tree that is in the show notes. The newest thing I have for you is that I've added a link for the books that people keep bringing up on the show. I've become an affiliate of an independent bookstore group, so please use my link to purchase those books our guests are talking about, and that way you don't have to remember as you're listening, and your purchase can help support the show, and we're supporting independent bookstores. It's a win-win-win-win-win. Okay, so one more thing before we meet today's guests. I met the smartest and funniest co-host of my new favorite podcast this week, and I want to tell you all about it. If you are a woman of a certain age, or headed towards it, or love someone who is, this is for you. And if you like the Kiss My Age show, you will love Circling the Drain. The concept of a woman circling the drain conjures up negative imagery for some, but for the hosts of Circling the Drain podcast, they've heard this phrase used so many times in reference to perimenopause, menopause, and the plight of the aging woman that they've chosen to reclaim and repurpose the phrase in the spirit of humor. Co-hosts and longtime friends Ellie and Julia take a deep dive into the sometimes embarrassing, often hilarious, always bewildering issues of hormonal changes that take place in midlife. Doesn't it feel like everyone is talking about this right now, or is that just my TikTok feed? Through honest accounts, thoughtful interviews, and group panel discussions, their mission is to make you chuckle, make you nod your head in recognition, and hopefully make some scientific progress. Tune in to Circling the Drain podcast every other Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts. Today on this podcast, I sat with Dr. Apollo Emeka. Apollo is the founder and CEO of Apollo Strategy Group, Inc., an innovative leadership and strategy consultancy for business leaders, companies, and the next wave of ventures launched by diverse and impactful founders. Since its inception, Apollo Strategy Group has created over $500 million in value for 100-plus high-performance leaders and businesses and industries such as technology, real estate, professional services, and entertainment by developing bespoke strategies and providing hands-on implementation. Prior to founding Apollo Strategy Group, Apollo launched and sold a business he scaled from 1 to 7 locations within 4 years while serving as an FBI intelligence analyst. In 2022, he retired from a decorated 20-year military career as a U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret and a U.S. military intelligence analyst. Apollo has a doctorate of policy planning and development from University of Southern California, fight on, and lives with his wife and 2 children in Pasadena, California. Apollo Strategy Group is small business certified, disabled veterans business certified, and minority business enterprise certified. We talked about his journey going from being unschooled to his PhD at USC, how he thinks about leadership and achievement, and how he works with clients to embed equity all along the way. Here, have a listen. I am going to say doctor. I'm here with Dr. Apollo Emeka. Welcome to The Other 50%.
Why, thank you, Julie. And please, just call me Apollo. I got my doctorate so that way people would feel obliged to call me doctor the first time that they say my name, and then I can just say, oh, no, please. Pish posh, please just call me Apollo.
You'd be super humble after that.
That's right, exactly.
Well, around here, we like to give credit where credit is due.
I'll take it.
I'll take it. Good. Thank you for coming. Could you tell us, kind of in your own words, how you explain what it is that you do?
We help leaders and teams who have really big goals align all of their people and resources to hit those big goals. So sometimes that involves coaching, facilitation, strategic planning. We bring this kind of host of wraparound hands-on services to help leaders and teams make big things happen.
Now, I'd love to hear how you got to that point. That sounds really big and strategic and cutting edge and like you're making things happen.
Mm-hmm. Like to think so.
I know that perhaps that wasn't always the case in your life. So if you could tell us kind of your origin story and how you got here, because I think it's a story unlike those that people typically hear.
Well, yeah, I think that one of the most catalyzing moments that I had in life happened when I was around 8 years old, and my parents decided to homeschool me. At least that's what they called it. But really, it was, I think the modern movement would be called no schooling.
Or unschooling,
Unschooling. Yeah, yeah. So
which means just let you follow whatever
that's it.
wild hair you have.
That is it. And so, I mean, that defined my adolescence, was just kind of like, yeah, following my curiosity and my whims and and my weaknesses in a lot of ways. Of, if I just didn't want to get out of bed, my parents were like, okay, don't. If I didn't want to go to soccer practice, my parents were like, okay, don't do it. And then I just would like quit. I kind of developed this habit of quitting and failing at almost everything that I got involved in.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that go? I think you've got to be super motivated. And what 8-year-old is, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I always felt like an adult trapped in a child's circumstances.
Mm.
And I remember, I mean, around that time, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to be an adult. I cannot wait to be an adult, to be able to kind of pursue all the things that I want to pursue, and to really be able to get another parenting term that I've learned is natural consequences. The natural consequences of your actions. So my parents were not the type that would, send me to timeout for 3 minutes, because when you're an adult, you don't really get sent to timeout for 3 minutes. So they were pretty big on natural consequences. They weren't super intentional about it, but that was what I just felt like I couldn't get the benefits of the feedback or the fruits of my actions as a child. So fourth grade is when I was like, oh yeah, I don't want to do school anymore like this. And my parents were like, okay. And then I just did no school. My dad, he tried, and there were times where he was like trying to teach me algebra in fourth grade. And he was like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm teaching you stuff that you wouldn't be able to learn at fourth grade in school. But then I would be able to sit down for like 15 minutes, and then my eyes would just like start rolling. And then you'd be like, all right, whatever. And then in fifth grade, I remember fifth grade rolled around, and I was like, oh gosh, okay. That was a fun experiment, but like, I was just sitting around the house, whatever, running around, riding bikes, building tree houses by myself because all my friends are in school. I need to go back to school. I need to go back. So in fifth grade, beginning of the year, I went back to school.
So you put yourself back in.
I put myself back in.
And I think it's worth noting, you're the youngest of, is it 4 boys?
Yeah, and the youngest of 4 boys by 11 years. So they're kind of clustered 11, 13, and 15 years older than I am.
And it's not that your family is not academic. 2 of your brothers are professors. Your father's super academic.
Yeah. So my dad's black. My mom was white. And my dad, who grew up in Arkansas in the segregated South, his father actually had a doctorate. So I think his father got his doctorate in the 50s or something like that. My dad had an MBA, has an MBA. And then, like you said, 2 of my brothers have terminal degrees. One has an MFA and the other has a PhD. So it wasn't so much like, we don't see the value in knowledge. We don't see the value in academics. It was more so just like, academics shouldn't cost you your soul, kind of. And that, systems are problematic. And that if this system is not serving you, then don't participate.
I kind of love that.
Yeah, it's wild. I found this, my dad actually maybe 10 years ago sent this thing that was like their scribblings on a notepad of like, why they should homeschool me or not. And it was so amazing to read. That list just resonated so hard. And a lot of it was, we want him to pursue his own curiosity. We want him to be able to kind of learn at his own pace and not be held back or rushed forward by the group and all of these things that it felt really, even at the time, it felt really messy, but it's so funny to see how a lot of what they intended actually happened. I now have a doctorate. So it's wild how that worked.
How you did things kind of on your own time. Because that feels like, as a parent, that feels like such a risky move, right? Because I think about all the time, I'm in this stage now where my kids are either graduating college or applying to college, and it's such a blatantly inequitable system.
Yeah.
And no part of me wants to participate. And also, we have to participate in order to get on with this American life.
Yeah. I mean, I think Well, so I guess fifth grade, I went to school. I was there for probably 5 weeks and I was like, oh, never mind. I remember why I hated this place. And I just bounced right back out. And I kind of, I kind of did that all the way up until high school. My mom got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when I was 17. And then 5 months later, she died. She passed away. And then I was like, oh, well, I'm never like, I was in complete free fall. I was a big mama's boy. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to have to, like, there's no way I'm going to be able to graduate from high school. And so I ended up dropping out and my dad signed for me to be able to go into the Army at 17. But, I think, and I had dreams of being on either Saturday Night Live or being in the FBI from the time that I was like 13 years old. And it was because I loved watching Saturday Night Live and I loved watching the X-Files. And I was able to hit one of those goals. I was in the FBI for 6 years. And so, there's this, with regards to your comments around the system, that there is kind of no such thing as non-participation in the system, or that it comes at a heavy cost. The more you try to not participate in the system, the more it extracts a heavy cost. I think that I learned to see the kind of like the code in the matrix from a really young age. Because I'm telling you, my mind exploded. I remember where I was sitting. I remember where my mom was sitting when she was like, you don't have to go back to school tomorrow. It's just like, what? What? And when you look at it, so much of our society, all of these social structures and institutions only exist on collective belief. That is the only thing that keeps them going, right? Is collective belief. And when enough people don't believe in the system, then the system changes, right? And so I was taught very young that like, hey man, all this stuff's made up, okay? Like school, no school, whatever. Like as long as you have a roof over your head and you have enough food to eat, like that's the bare minimum. That's the stuff that's immutable. You got to have that, right? But like other than that, like school, no school, whatever, it's all made up. And so I think that what I had the benefit of being able to see the code in the matrix from a young age, but I also didn't like being broke. I didn't like I was very conscious from a young age that we didn't have money, and a lot of it is because of the way that my parents chose to participate or not in the system. And so I realized, hey, I need to get some discipline. And that's why I was drawn to the Army, because I was like, okay, yeah, everything's made up, but if you play by their rules, then you reap the rewards that the system doles out. So I got to figure out how to make that happen.
That's an amazing realization to have really young. Because I think collectively, it feels like recently we're all kind of figuring out, oh, this is made up. We're all doing it this way because that's how we've always done it. But someone made it up in the first place. Someone designed it this way, and it doesn't have to be that way. But to know that as a kid, it's interesting how that would then affect the rest of your life and how you pursue things.
Yeah, I think that it's more important than ever to realize how much everything is made up. Our system of money, our system of government, these things only exist because we believe that they do. And so we're at a more fragile point than I think people really realize, because we take the dollar for granted and we take, our political institutions for granted, and we talk trash and we lament both of those things, but we also we talk about them like they're these invincible giants. And I think that we're at a point where things are more fragile than most people realize. But I think people are starting to kind of wake up to that. So like you said, we're having this kind of collective awakening to the made up nature and of these social constructs that define a lot of what happens in our lives.
Well, I used to say this a lot about work, while I was at work in an office job, and people would look at me like I had 7 heads. But I would say, you know what? We've made this whole thing up. We're all here playing work. Like this thing we're doing doesn't really matter. And my theory was we're all kind of here to work out our stuff, to help each other, to do things collectively. But the ultimate, like whatever this business is doing, didn't necessarily really matter in the big scheme of things.
Mm-hmm. And when you say here, are we talking like metaphysical here, or are we talking about like an address here?
Oh, I meant like whatever we're doing in this building for this company, like in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter. Like we were never curing cancer, right? It was always just, we're all running around being really stressed out, having all these meetings, and we've all decided that it's really important. But in the big scheme of the cosmos and humanity, it wasn't important at all. But there was something about that. We all believe this is important, so we're all going to put our heart and soul into it and work out whatever we need to work out while we're here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, So then I guess what do you see as kind of righteous work? You mentioned curing cancer. Like if we're curing cancer, is that, like what is righteous work?
Oh God. I mean, yeah, curing cancer seems important. Like for me, it's, I don't even know if I can put it in a sentence, but there's something about, I know, creating a better world, creating a better society, having more equality, having a place where people can be who they're meant to be and do the thing that they're meant to do, and creating that environment.
Yeah, I love it.
What is it for you?
Well, yeah, I think it's the same thing. I guess I just see it as like, I think that you can do that almost from anywhere.
Yeah.
I think that and I think that's the hard part that's the hard thing about being a part of an institution, is it almost feels like people think you kind of have to do it the like evil way almost. It's like, no, we have to do things in a way that's exploitative. Otherwise, we're not going to make money.
Right.
Or we have to do things in a way that doesn't consider people's feelings. Otherwise, we're like this woke, like mushy thing that's just, again, not going to make money. That's not thinking about the bottom line. And I think that there are so many examples of companies that are doing things in a non-evil way, and they're making good money and they're doing good in the world, and I'm sure I could say some names and people are like, oh no, they're not good. But I mean, the things I've heard about like Patagonia, that's an unmatched.
For sure.
They're almost unfair to point out because it's almost like a nonprofit for-profit company.
Like they're playing a different game.
They're playing a different game. They are. And that's the thing though, that like, that's how you can be a participant in the system, but you can leverage the rules of the system to do things in a way that actually that's net positive. And I think that the owner of Patagonia sees the code in the matrix. And so he was like, hey, like you guys have got to find a way to essentially make us a nonprofit for profit. Otherwise, I'm going to sell this company. But there are lots of companies that are out there that I think have a net positive impact on the world. And certainly like, lots of people that have a net positive impact on the world. And we just act like you can either do good or you can do well. And I just reject that.
I love that phrase. Either you can do good or you can do well. Yeah, you have to be able to do both. I think this has come into such sharp relief for me, especially lately, when like you're looking at every single studio in Hollywood has just had massive layoffs.
Yeah.
And and I'm not just bitter Betty because it happened to me recently, but when you're looking at these companies, and I gotta think they're profitable companies, but not in the way that makes the shareholders happy. So then it feels like the capitalism to make the very few people at the very top obscenely wealthy at the cost of thousands of well-paying jobs that are supporting families and supporting lifestyles seems not right to me, put it mildly.
Yeah, there's this series on Netflix called Fill in the Blank Explained, and there's Billionaires Explained. And basically it's really cool. They have these illustrations for like explaining billionaires and kind of the economic consequences of billionaires. But one of the things that was really salient with me is, I can't remember what illustration they had, but it really stuck with me that like when you can afford to just park your money, right? Like when you can just afford to park your money and kind of press pause, like that's why billionaires stay billionaires, right? Like most Americans cannot hit the financial pause button, but billionaires can. And so when like with all of these layoffs, the people who help to put the company in the position to make a whole bunch of money, that value gets captured by the company and it gets captured by the top executives and by the shareholders. And so they're kind of like locked in. Right. And then when it's like, oh, shoot, we need to sit on the sidelines for a little bit, then we can reduce our overhead, i.e. fire a bunch of people, but our value is still captured. So what's happening in that moment is like, we're maybe not, as the elites are not making a ton of money at that time. They can afford to sit on the sidelines and they're still going to be able to pay their bills. That value is still captured. Whereas all the people who get laid off, right? Like they didn't in the 10 years that they worked for that company did not stack massive amounts of value that allowed them to sit on the sidelines until the next upswing, right? So I think that there's a challenge in that there's no financial or even moral consequence for perpetuating that pattern of let's build up a company, let's hire a bunch of people, and now we can feel good that we're employing X amount of people, and we build it up and we capture a bunch of value, and then now we need to kind of sit on the sidelines for a bit, and we're going to decrease our overhead, and we're still going to be fine. That's a huge challenge in our economy.
Well, yeah, and it's presented in a way of, for the good of the company, we have to make these difficult decisions with the assumption that, we're all going to be on board with the good of the company. Of course, that's our highest value, for the good of the company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about you and your work. I feel like we've gone down this rabbit hole. What is your philosophy when working with clients, helping them achieve what they want to achieve? How do you look at it?
I draw a lot from my own personal experience, and that is, I spent so much time trying to make up for the fact that I didn't have the discipline, that I didn't have the soccer trophies and the basketball trophies and the debate team trophies and the graduation caps and all this at the various stages in life. I spent so much time seeing myself as an underdog, seeing myself as not worthy because I didn't check any of the boxes that society can recognize as being valuable, and I spent the first 10 years of my adulthood trying to make up for all of these things that I perceived to be deficits, from, high school to diploma to sports to you name it. I mean, I just did not have any kind of pedigree, track record, or the type of habits that build those things. And so then I spent the next 10 or 15 years like getting all the accolades. I stacked up, I checked all the boxes. Came off of active duty after deploying to Iraq and moved straight to LA, went to community college and took like 1 million units back to back, transferred to USC, did really well there, got into the FBI, became a Green Beret in the military, entered a doctoral program, started a business, sold it. So I had like 5 things going on at one point. And, and I had all of these things that you could point to, and you could say, oh, that guy is successful because he's got the top academic degree that you can have. He's in one of the most respected. He did the things, right? And so in doing all the things, it was so funny because it was like, I checked a lot of boxes in a short amount of time, a bunch of them. And I realized that whenever I went into a room, I was like, I was an anomaly, in a room full of Green Berets. I was the only kind of like theater dude, or like theater dude who was in marriage counseling with his wife. In a room full of theater people or entrepreneurs or whatever, I was the only like Green Beret, So like, I think that comes from the DNA of my diverse experiences of being able to, I dabbled in so many things as a kid. I got exposed to so many different things as a kid that I drew on these weird experiences. I drew on these things that at the time were like, oh my gosh, no, you should be in school. You shouldn't be running around in Seattle, like doing theater or practicing capoeira. You should be in school with everybody else. And but again, it was like all of these things that kind of had made me a weirdo or an outcast that I actually was drawing from that helped me check all these boxes in such a short amount of time. And also, I think some people have a really hard time, and I'm going to get to the work philosophy in just a second. Some people have a really hard time identifying which boxes you like really, really got to check and which boxes are there just because somebody thought to put that box there, but you don't really have to check it. And I got really good at seeing those boxes, of seeing like, okay, what are the boxes that you absolutely must check? And what are the boxes that are kind of suggestions or are just there because like whoever was in charge of making the boxes at the time was just like, I don't know, let's just put a thing like here. Like that's literally how stuff happens. And so
I have an idea.
I have an idea. Yeah. Or like, yeah.
It's a requirement in stone.
Exactly. So my own success accelerated the more that I leveraged the weirdness about me. And the cool thing is that we're all kind of weirdos, but we are taught to tuck it in. We're taught to be like, no, I'm not a weirdo. I swear, I'm just like everybody else.
I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm fine. You're fine. We're all fine. I'm just as fine as you. No more fine than you. Maybe a little bit more fine than you, but not much more. Yeah. So like this idea that like that normal is best. Like normal is best. Fitting in is best. And so for so long, I felt that pressure, and being the only Black kid in a super white town growing up also had an impact of me really wanting to just no. I'm just like you. I'm normal. But the more I started to be like, oh, wait, no, these things are weird about me. But like, what does this weirdness position me to do? That maybe somebody else that doesn't have this particular flavor of weirdness wouldn't be able to do. So maybe I shouldn't be looking at how do I travel the beaten path really, really quickly. Instead, it's like, oh, how do I walk the paths that only I could walk because of my unique experiences? And, everybody has something that's a little bit weird and a lot of times it's the things that we're ashamed of. I was ashamed of where I lived growing up at the end of a dirt road in a trailer with no money, and I would have people drop me off at the top of the driveway so they wouldn't see my house and whatnot. And I realized that being broke gave me so much resilience. It gave me so much perspective, and it made it so that I can go low maintenance if I have to, right? Like I can find other paths if I have to, because that's what you do when you're broke. Mm-hmm. So what we do, essentially, I told you I was going to make it around eventually. What we do is we help people and teams and companies identify, hey, what is your unique DNA that positions you to be the leader that no one else could be because of your unique set of experiences? What is it that this team coming together with all of these skills and all of these experiences, what are you positioned to do that no one else could do because they don't have your collective DNA? And the same thing with companies. And so it's really about really getting to know our clients and getting to know the folks that we work with, so that way we can identify what is going to be your unique advantage. And then how do we build around that unique advantage, rather than, kind of benchmarking off of a competitor or trying to be like some other leader that you saw, or, just trying to like not rock the boat and make everything normal, or help to protect you from being perceived as an outcast or something. It's like, no, use those things, because those are the things that, that's the experience that's gonna help you bring something unique to the world, to that office, to that place where you're just showing up to make the world a better place.
I'm curious how you got there in yourself to realize, oh, this is actually my superpower and my secret sauce. Like, how did you get there? And then also, can you give us an example of what you're talking about?
I hope so. How did I realize it? We've all had the feeling where we're sitting in a room and you're like, is it me? Like, do I not understand what's happening here? Because it feels like we're all emperors, no closing it right now. So that feeling when you're sitting there and you're like, what? I need to go read a book or something, because the things that are happening in this room sound kind of crazy. Based on my experience, the thing that you're trying to do sounds crazy, right? And so it's like, I had this thing where I was like, okay, if everybody sounds crazy, then I'm probably the problem, right? I'm probably the one that's messed up here.
Because everyone's acting like, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And like at most, maybe people will be silent. And there's these things that are happening where, and it could be a hiring decision. It could be a product decision. It could be a business decision. It could be a conversation about like sending your kids to what school you're going to send your kids to. And everyone's just having this conversation. And you're like, this sounds just bonkers. It sounds off. And I think, for so long, I trained myself to try to shut that voice down. And to say, well, no, everybody else thinks this way, so it's got to be you. It has to be you. Like, of course, you don't understand because you didn't have the conventional accolades or whatever. You didn't have that conventional upbringing. So they're speaking a language that you don't get, and you need to learn to understand this language.
So you're thinking first, I need to code switch to get along here, rather than I have something else that probably needs to be said out loud.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, I've done my fair share of code switching, but I've always been kind of obsessed with learning as well. And so I would be in these rooms and I'd be like, tell me more, because help me get there. Help me get to where this will all make sense to me. When I started to kind of like push back on this, I was in enough rooms where enough things were happening that were making the hair on the back of my neck stand up and being like, yo, my spidey sense is going off. Something doesn't feel right. And then I just started asking provocative questions in these spaces where it was relevant. Or if it was like, oh, I'm completely powerless in this situation, then I'd be like, okay, I need to get out of here because actually this is messed up. So I need to go someplace where people aren't talking like this, right? Like that was one thing, is like, can I get what I want out of life and be in fewer rooms where boring ass conversations like this, like boring ass super status quo conversations like this are happening? Can I have less of this in my life? And if I can't have less of this in my life because there are rooms like this that are standing between me and what I want. Well, then how do I walk into these spaces with authenticity? And how do I bring my own unique perspective and value into those spaces in a way that is collaborative, that's provocative and disruptive, but it's as collaborative as it is those things. So for instance, a lot of times it's the smallest thing of just like thinking what other people are saying. I mean, saying what other people are thinking. It's as small as saying like, wait, how do we know that, how do we know this is true? Right? Like asking a question, how do we know that's true? Just a question that's as simple as that can change the course of a conversation. I'm trying to think of kind of like a watershed moment. I think a lot of it has been very private for me because again, like there was one point where I was in the FBI. I was running a business. I was in a doctoral program. I was a newlywed running a business with my wife. And I was a Green Beret doing special forces stuff outside the country a couple weeks or a couple months a year.
Wait, all at the same time?
All at the same time. And so a lot of that is like the way I use my unique experience is to say like, okay, I can see which of these things are like, which of these boxes are made up and which of them are real. So I just got better at seeing like, okay, well, if I'm going to do 5 things at a time, how do I make sure that like I'm only checking the boxes in each of those 5 things that are absolutely necessary to be successful there? And how do I, as much as possible, overlap so that like checking a box in one place checks a box across 3 of the things that I'm doing or something. So for instance, like,
you just said something that I heard it like, as a woman, we do the opposite. When you said figuring out how many of those boxes you have to check to be successful, but I think women are conditioned to be successful. I have to check every last one of those boxes and a couple more that aren't even on the list in order to be successful. When we have all found out that's not the thing that makes you successful. That makes you the person who checks off all the things on the list.
For sure. I mean, yeah, Black women are the most educated demographic in the country, right? And that doesn't show up in wealth and position and title. It does, right? So
there's something else.
There's something else, yeah. And so I think the more kind of layered your identity is, the more, by race, gender, orientation, the more kind of layers you have, the more there is this instinct to get the degrees and the certification and the job title and the assets under management and the whatever. So you have those accolades because you're like, oh, surely, as soon as I have this thing, then people will listen to me.
If I'm the most qualified person in the room, I might win the election.
Yeah.
And still no.
Right? So yeah. So I think that one of the things that I also realized really early on was that people don't care about accolades as much as they care about what you can do for them. And so what I learned really early on is if you want to be successful, find out the people who are holding the keys to that gate and find out how to be valuable to them. And here's the trick, in a way that's authentic to you. And that's for 2 reasons. Because 1 is so that way you can sleep at night. And 2, it's because if you lean into your own authenticity, you're going to find ways to provide value that other people just won't have, because those tools are not in their bag because they didn't have those experiences.
Yeah, you stumped me because now I'm thinking if you're not a match to what they need, then you probably need to go someplace else.
Say more.
I'm thinking I'd love that idea of you have your unique thing and you need to do it authentically, but still give the people who hold the keys to power what they need to be successful will make you successful. Am I saying that back right?
Sure. Yeah.
But then what if your special sauce is not at all the thing that is going to be helpful in that situation with that person? Then do you need to look elsewhere?
I think that first I would look at how do I really leverage that authenticity, like that my authentic self, to provide value here? Because I guess the thing that's tricky about it is it's not like, oh, I did ballet growing up, so therefore I need to do ballet dance in front of the VP of such and such. Like,
wait till he sees my jetés.
Exactly. It's not, I mean, sometimes it's that literal. Like I have taken executives to the shooting range, and that's a skill set that I have, is shooting and teaching people to shoot. And so sometimes it is that literal. I've done, I grew up doing theater, and at SC, I had a theater minor, and then I went on to do Upright Citizens Brigade. I did some improv stuff. And so like that's a tool in my toolkit that I've done improv stuff with our clients because that is literally a tool in my toolkit. But oftentimes it's like the things that I've learned from improv have showed up in literal ways very minimally in the work. But that unique experience, being able to draw from the experience of standing on a stage with 7 other people who we're all telling a collective story with no planning, and it needs to make sense and it needs to be funny. The level of listening that has to happen, the level of being able to support people that has to happen in order to do that is like, it's a mind-numbing skill. When I was doing improv, I would literally go home and take a nap after 2 hours of improv because I was so smoked.
Yeah. Exhausting. And I bet you use yes and every day of your life.
Exactly. And being able to, so all of these things, it's about really, the trick is to really love your experiences and to love yourself. So that way your subconscious knows to access your full self at work. But I think so much of us, we kind of like compartmentalize, and we resent ourselves for certain things, or we're embarrassed by the fact that we do improv, and maybe somebody's going to want to come see me and they're going to see that I'm not funny and it's going to suck. And I'm going to, compartmentalize. And so like we close off these experiences and these would-be skill sets because we're like, oh, that doesn't apply, or, oh, that kind of makes me a weirdo, or like, it's not like I'm up there, being Amy Poehler or something like that. I'm not an improv guru, so I can't really call it a skill that I have. But like, it's really about recognizing and appreciating all of your experiences so that you can bring that to bear when it really matters. Because like you said, the yes and, the listening, the being part of a team when things are chaotic, like improv is a really great model for that. But I also have the special forces model that also gives me, how to be part of a high performance team when things are chaotic and when you have a really hard thing that you're trying to accomplish. So it's really about, how do I recognize and activate these different experiences that I've had in this moment when I'm sitting with an executive who's looking at whether to hire or fire, or who's looking at whether to expand the product or to do away with it, right? Like what experiences can I call on that are going to help me help them get to a decision and implement it?
So are you working one-on-one with people or with teams or both?
Both. Yeah. We do one-on-one coaching. And then we also do, on the light end of the spectrum, we'll do like I'll do one-off speaking, or we'll do one-off facilitations. And then I guess it kind of graduates up to one-on-one coaching, and then various levels of kind of, maybe a couple month-long engagements of kind of getting some strategic gear unstuck on a team or at a company. And then we have full-blown engagements that are multi-year. Hey, we want to launch this product, or we want to get a certain amount of assets under management. And then we have a 3-year horizon, and we're their kind of strategic thought partners through those engagements.
That sounds really fun, actually.
It's super fun.
Yeah. Now, I know that you don't, or correct me if I'm wrong, you don't specifically do like DE&I work, but I also sense that it's kind of baked in to everything that you do, especially talking about bringing your full authentic self to work. And we've talked about this a lot in the past, as when you're talking to kind of established old companies that are led by cis heterosexual white men who are really just at the beginning of figuring out there's some systemic disparities in the country and in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I'm always trying to figure out, like, how do you meet the people where they are and kind of lead them to where they need to be? And I know we've talked about you having a bit more of like a confrontation, confrontational may not be the right word, being more direct about it than maybe I would be. But can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, first, I mean, I not to let the cis old white guys off the hook here, but I wish that they were the only problem. It really is a systemic issue, and when I say it's like lack of equity on any spectrum, and we all are participants. We're all participants to varying degrees, and it's wild when there are kind of we're working with folks who I would consider to be kind of young and progressive, who say and do really problematic things, or even people of color who are saying and doing things that I feel like are counterproductive to achieving equity and justice overall.
Because it's the water we've all been swimming in.
That's it. That is it. And I think, like, especially when you kind of throw the generational issues in there, it's funny. I was talking to this young Black woman yesterday, and she's like, "Hey, I'm looking for my next thing. Might you know anybody?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I do know somebody who needs your skill set. Let me put you on." And she's like, "Wow, this is really great. Like, I appreciate this because we've had like one conversation ever." She randomly hit me up on LinkedIn, and she's like, I appreciate you like going out on a limb for me." And yeah, again, probably, I don't know. She might listen to this, but I don't know. She's probably in her late 20s, maybe a Black woman in her late 20s. And I said, as I've been navigating through these larger corporations, you run into people of color who are literally afraid to bring me on and my team because we're also all a bunch of diverse folks and predominantly Black women. And there are folks who are Black and they're in companies and they're like, "Oh man, I don't know, like, should I do this? Or are they going to think that I'm just the person who brings in all the Black people?"
Right. It's affiliation covering.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, shoot. And I'm like, what? Like, but most of the people who have that kind of sentiment were entering the workforce in the 70s, 80s, 90s, when things were like you really had to tread lightly. And it was so funny talking to this woman in, like I said, probably her late 20s, who was like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that was even a thing. Like, I had no idea that somebody might be that cautious to where they wouldn't introduce somebody who looks like them because they're afraid that people are going to be like, you're bringing too many people who look like you." They just it wasn't in her math at all. And so it's good.
Well, that's actually it's really hopeful.
It's hopeful. Yeah. You said, yeah. It's like,
yeah.
I think
so.
We're
getting somewhere.
I think and hope. And I mean, like, what is cool is I think she shows up like as her authentic self. She was like, "Hey, look, it's all the articles that you read about Gen Z." She's like, "Yo, I want to work remote. I want to make this much money. I want to do this. I want to do that." And I'm like, "Yo, go girl, go." So
I'm closing my laptop at 5:00.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly. And this is the kind of laptop that I want too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's, but I think, the way that we approach this is by, first of all, I mean, our team, the people that we recommend, it looks like we are trying to actually make things more equal. It looks like we're actually trying to balance the scales. When we're helping companies hire, we look to ensure that the candidate pools are diverse and that we're addressing biases right up front, and looking to make sure that companies are really getting the full benefits of having diverse teams. So some of the things that we do are implied just by, again, showing up, and it's like, oh man, like I have clients that are at companies that we work with where they're like, they'll text me on the side and be like, it's so cool how you keep bringing these Black women to come help us.
Like whispering.
Yeah, straight up whispering. Like, it's so cool.
Do you find yourself having to, like, if you're helping someone with a candidate search and you're presenting them with that pool of candidates, are you finding doing that is enough, or are you also having to explain to them why you're doing that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I just had a conversation not too long ago with an executive in a company that we're working with where it's like, "Hey, I know one of the other senior people in the company is troubled by the lack of women in senior leadership roles and feels like she doesn't have anybody to talk to." And he's like, "Oh, who told you that?" I'm like, "She did." So, these conversations that are not making their way to the highest echelons of these companies, because we're so hands-on, we have views into companies that are really unique because we'll be coaching or facilitating kind of all over, and we get to see and hear these different perspectives, and then we get to take action. And just a lot of times it's a strategic conversation, just like that one. Like, "Hey, basically, you better have a really damn good reason for not hiring a woman into this role, because a woman the only other woman at this level is calling out the fact that she's the only woman at this level. And is saying that, hey, we're having I'm having a hard time communicating and feeling like I'm part of the team because of it. So a lot of times it is that kind of tactical and direct feedback of like, yo, no more white dudes in this role.
Because once you say that, then the act of not hiring a woman into that role is saying something, right? Because once you have the information to not take the action, that's giving a whole other message that you may not actually want to be giving.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like also, I saw this headline on LinkedIn. I wish I remembered who had written it, but basically it was saying like making the business case for diversity is anti-diversity, basically. Like, and I was like, oh yeah. I didn't even read the article, but I was like, oh no.
Say more about that, because I feel like if it's 2023, like if you're still needing to have the business case explained to you, like what are you even doing? But what did you hear when you saw that headline?
Well, I think that so many places are still so not diverse and are still so successful. So I think it's hard to just be like, duh, diversity makes better businesses. Because it's
if
like
they have no evidence and they're fine, why would they believe it?
Yeah, exactly. And so like I think it's not just a given for people, because it just doesn't bear out anecdotally, like there are lots of boards, there are lots of senior executive teams at big successful companies that are just as homogenous as you've ever seen, So I think like I've been thinking less and less that the kind of business case for diversity is not even an effective argument at this point. But I think it's also like one of the things I had this massive problem with this company that we were working with was talking about implementing software for when they're hiring that will strip away identifying information on resumes, that'll strip names off, and essentially so that way you can't tell you can't tell a black sounding name, a female sounding name, a white sounding name. And it's like, if you're going to pass on a resume that says Jamal, but Jamal went to Harvard and Jamal, was an ex-Googler, ex-Meta, ex-whatever, all the things, but his name's Jamal, and so you're going to pass. You're not doing yourself or Jamal any favors by like hiring him without knowing that he's Jamal, because when he gets there, that same sentiment that was like, I don't know, sounds like somebody that wouldn't really fit in here. Like, you're probably right. Like, so I think that like a lot of the stuff that's done, a lot of the diversity stuff is that way. It's like, well, if we could just kind of
trick people into it.
Yeah. Let's trick people into it. Jamal's going to be miserable at your company if you had to trick everybody on the hiring committee and to like, oh yeah, and then like it's revealed like, oh, he's actually a black guy. Like, oh wow, my whole life is turned upside down, and now I want to hire black people. Like, no, that's not going to be the case, right? So I think that like that again, that kind of like business case, it's like there's something about it that's not effective. Because there are plenty of predominantly white-dominated leadership teams that lead really successful companies, and two, it's like it fails to see just the kind of the human aspect of diversity and seeing people as people. Like, wow, you might do it if you can see it, if you can see that there's a business case for doing it. Like, that is not the argument that we want to win.
Yeah, because you'll make more money.
Yeah.
Good job.
And then when you don't, like, I saw this article where, what was it? The Wall Street Journal was blaming the one black dude on the board for the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, right? So it's like...
Well, that was just such bullshit. I don't know how anyone could have taken that seriously.
Well, I mean, it gets printed, right? And I mean, like, there's...
people keep repeating it. It was a talking point on Fox, but it was... What, one black guy on the board completely disabled the power of the 10 other white guys.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh, so business case for diversity? Oh, yeah, I think not. Look what this guy did to Silicon Valley Bank. So it's like...
all their focus was on diversity. It was just so ridiculous.
So ridiculous. But it got printed, right? In a reputable paper. Like, I mean, it's these ideas are still
unchallenged, allowed
to fly, right? So I think that, yeah, for me, it's really about walking it like you talk it. As like, we have to do that as a company. Like at Apollo Strategy Group, we have to walk it like we talk it, and then we also have to when you're in the room and you're like, oh, hold up, this doesn't sound right. Like being able to speak up and being able to say something and then actually put something in a place that's going to change it in a way that works for that company. Because again, you force diversity on people and it's gonna be, I think that there was a time and place for forcing diversity, and it was 60s, it was civil rights, it was like, and I think that a lot of people are still in that mindset, and we have to evolve. We have to be unrelenting in our pursuit of equity and of diversity, but quotas and mandates are I do not think the way to do it. I think that it's important to understand the data, but I think what really needs to happen is some tough ass conversations. That's what's got to happen, because quotas and mandates without the tough ass conversations, it's either going to be performative, or one of the things that I've seen in the pandemic post George Floyd's murder is, the minority business enterprise. We're minority business enterprise certified. So my blackness has been proved. You have to send in your birth certificate and all this stuff. And what I saw, there were all these pots of money allegedly earmarked for minority business enterprises. And what was happening a lot in the business world was they were looking for essentially tokens who they could build minority business enterprises around, and then be like, 50-50 or 51-49 splits with them, because but then dip into these pots of money that were earmarked, or programs that were earmarked for minority business enterprises. So again, it's like this, like, it's gross. Great. Yeah, it's gross, right? And so I think, there were a lot of cynical folks who I was having the tough ass conversations with, of like, who were on the, I'm about to get 51-49 in my minority business enterprise. I'm a black person who built my business, and now I'm about to get 51-49. So that way this big ass company will back me to go get this pot of money or this big contract or whatever. And it's like, yo, no. Like, they're tokenizing. And so that's what I think happens. And then, you go and you have the conversations, and you're just like, no, this is what it is. Like, and standing in your authenticity and saying, like, I'm not going to be the, you're not going to be we're not going to have a white shadow CEO to my minority business enterprise. And we're not going to have backdoor deals that make it so that you get the disproportionate amount of the profits, because again, these are the conversations that we're having.
Wait, that we're having. For your business, or
heck no,
clients?
No.
I was gonna say
for clients and folks that we work with.
Okay.
No. I
was gonna say
no, but yeah. So I think I'm not even. I wouldn't say I'm anti-quota, but I'm like anti-quota without context. And it's like, you have to have the tough conversations. We love having strategic conversations around diversity. Like, here's what happened. Here's the transatlantic slave trade. And now look what happened hundreds of years ago. And now look, and then the 60s and this amendment and that amendment and this, that, and the other. But like, and we talk about implicit bias as a concept. We talk about all these things highly strategically, theoretically, in ways that are safe. But when it comes time to like, yo, but everybody on your board is still a white dude. Those are the conversations that we're not having, right? And so we're thinking that,
because we're tired of talking about it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's like, well, you saw what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. Of course.
Their wokeness dragged them under. How do you make that argument to a homogenous board of here's why you need to do something different?
I guess, again, we're very, very hands-on in the work that we do. We're not the kind of like research and recommend type of consultants. We're like, hey, let's co-create a strategy and then let's help you implement that strategy. And so I think...
You don't deliver the PowerPoints and then walk away?
We don't
like
do
most
that.
Consulting firms.
we don't do that. And I think, there's some merit to having really good recommendations and having really good data, but it's all, the value of it is limited or sometimes even counterproductive if there's no will to implement it or there's no capacity to implement. And so the way that we approach things is by at each step in the process thinking about diversity. At each step, okay, well, how is this product that you're building going to impact underestimated or disadvantaged communities, right? Like that's a thing that you can't just put it in a mission statement or a vision statement. You have to actually make the tactical decisions of how you're constructing your product in a way that's going to make things harder for people just because of, what language they speak or what color their skin is. So it's really about at each step saying, okay, what does equity look like at this step? What does equity look like in this role, in this composition of this leadership team? So we take a really kind of, it's almost like how do I say it? We don't think about mandates and quotas. We just think about how do we keep equity in mind at each step in the implementation of your strategy.
That's it. It's the embedding equity in each step along the way.
Yeah. And I wish that there was some magic wand for how you do that, right? But it really comes down to emotions and people. And so you have to be ready to have those conversations with people in a way that holds them accountable, but is non-judgy, and that's a fine line to walk of having accountability without judgment.
Because there's an empathy piece in there to get people to think about other people in a way that doesn't judge them for not having thought about other people.
Exactly. But then hold them accountable. Like, okay, well, now you've had this conversation, right? So like, now what are we going to do? And even, I expect that they're going to continue to operate the way that they have been operating, right? So like, I go in with that expectation that even now they know, or they've thought about it, or they've said they care or whatever. I expect that their behavior is not going to change. And so but it must, right? And so like, and it's not like we're successful every time, or like all the companies that we work with just look like the United Nations, but we try to be as thoughtful as possible in moving people out of their comfort zones and towards more diversity.
Well, because it's a shift in thinking, and I think going back to the embedding at every step along the way, because there's a shift of, oh, I get it, I'm going to do better. We're going to do some diversity work on the side after we get done with all of these business objectives that we're going to do. And it's a matter of pulling them back and being like, no, wait a minute. You're going to do the diversity work in every step of this business strategy that you're doing. Exactly. It's not going to be on the side later.
Exactly. And, I think when there's opportunities, when companies are, now it's a little tougher because most of the companies that we are working with are contracting rather than expanding. But when people are hiring, I feel like it's really, and again, in the way that we work, it's really easy when people are hiring, because you can just, we're going to change the makeup, and we're also going to help to create venues for conversations where, where these diverse personalities can come out. So it's not just about getting visual diversity, but it is like, oh shoot, yeah, this person does have a perspective that we don't have, and like we need to honor that. But if you hire and you don't create the venues to have unexpected conversations, then it's going to be painful for everyone.
Yeah, well, if you have 7 guys in the room who all went to the same school and were in the same fraternity, what is the point of hiring an 8th one? How does that help you?
Well, I mean, the thing that's tough is it is really freaking helpful. Like, that's the thing that's tough, is it is actually helpful. It's a certain type of help, but like, again, you can't point to all these companies where there are plenty of companies that I've been like, hey, please stop. I've had to say to one of my favorite clients, I'm like, please stop sending me companies of all white dudes. Like, and there are these companies that are skyrocketing, and it's literally a bunch of white guys. So we can't just make the blanket statement that like you're going to be better off hiring diverse, because in the short run, at the very least, you're probably going to be just fine with all your white guys. I think that you're going to be just fine, like I said, in the short term, but I think that the companies that employ the most diversity are going to win out in the long run, and are the ones who come in and are positioned to be the massive market disruptors that just transform industries, that just wipe you out, So I think that, again, the business case is a little tenuous in the short term, because you hire so-and-so who also went to Harvard and was also in the same fraternity and also summered in France and also like,
you have a shorthand. You're going to make the thing quick.
Yeah. It's like they know all the same people, or the same kinds of people that and so they're going to be able to bring them to the company. Like, it's you can't just say like right now your company is going to go under if you don't diversify.
No, but when it comes to when you're going to have to really innovate and be creative and think about things maybe from a different angle than you always have.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah,
try to
absolutely.
avoid setting up that bro culture that's going to take you under in different ways.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, and obviously we know unlocking market segments and things like that. It's that diverse piece is really important as well.
Okay. Now, what have I not asked you about that I should have asked you about? Because I've had you for a lot of time now.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I talked so much.
Well, you're on a podcast, so that's the ideal behavior. Tell me about, you just started a podcast. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about the podcast that we just launched. It's called the Achievement Index, and it shares a name with this assessment that I developed in my doctoral work. And basically, the underlying premise of the Achievement Index is it measures how well you do three things: prioritize, leverage, and execute. Because in my work, I found that those are the three things that you have to do really well in order to be successful. You have to prioritize, meaning you have to know what matters and why it matters, know what what you seek to do. You have to leverage, which means whereas in the prioritize dimension, you're thinking really ambitiously, and you're thinking about, oh man, which mountaintop am I going to take? What flag am I going to, what mountaintop am I going to plant my flag on? And then on the leverage side, you're thinking really lazy. You take your ambitious hat off and you put your lazy hat on, and you say, okay, wait, what's the easiest way that I can get to the top of that mountain? And so that's leverage. And
explain that a little more, because I was reading up on this from you, and I'm not sure I'm still totally clear on what you mean by leverage. Leverage what?
So leverage has four components: technology, information, people, and systems. So you've got a goal, right? You've got and we call this the base camp. You're building out your base camp at the bottom of the mountain, which is your technology, information, people, and systems that are going to make climbing that mountain easy. So it's like, okay, well, how can we use technology to make climbing this mountain easy? How can we use information to make climbing this mountain easy? How can we leverage people, or how can we leverage systems to make climbing this mountain easy? And then the execute is all about charting the course up the mountain and then actually taking the steps up the mountain. And so it's about figuring out who's going to do what by when, basically, who's going to leverage what by when to get to the top of the mountain. And I found that people, they tend towards one of the three more than the others, So like myself, I'm heavy prioritize. I'm something like 84% prioritize, 8% leverage, and 8% execute. So I love sitting down at the bottom of the mountain, looking at the mountain ranges and trying to decide, where is it that which mountaintop are we going to take? And so, yeah, the folks who we have on the podcast are diverse founders and leaders who take the assessment, and then we come on and we kind of just talk through all of the things that they've done through the lens of their results. So it's like, hey, you have 4% execute, but you've managed to raise $250 million and build all these companies. How did you get that done when you are like, you're a big leverager or you're a big prioritizer and not so much an executor? And our first handful of guests have been just these amazing Black and brown founders who have just done awesome stuff, especially in the VC space and the venture space, but internationally. And have made big things happen. So it's really cool to be able to have them take this assessment, to see their results, to have them process their results, and then say, yeah, how did you do that? And so every show, we also have these kind of actionable takeaways. So you can also take the Achievement Index assessment as well. And then kind of like, if you match up with one of the guests, then then they're basically doling out advice for you from, for your kind of personality type. So it's a really fun show, and it's been an amazing experience so far.
Okay. Can I go take that? Where can I take it?
Yeah. theachievementindex.com. theachievementindex.com is where you can take the assessment. And it's also, if you go to the Achievement Index, wherever you get your podcasts, the link to the assessment is in the show notes as well.
Okay. That is super fun. How else, or where else can people find you?
LinkedIn is basically my Facebook. all of my personal stuff, everything. LinkedIn is like the only place I look anymore. So yeah, if you want to find me on LinkedIn. I am on there like as much as anybody else is on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. I read all my DMs. I respond. I dole out recommendations for people who hit me up in my DMs and want connections. So
careful what you wish for.
so feel free to hit me up.
Anything you want to leave us with? Any advice?
I'll leave you with what makes you different, makes you strong. Love yourself so that way, all parts of yourself, so that way your subconscious knows to access all parts of yourself and to bring that to bear at whatever task is at hand.
I love it. Apollo Emeka, Dr. Apollo Emeka, thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Oliver. Thank you to Dr. Apollo Emeka for the conversation. Special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and rate and leave a review. If you have a company and would like to sponsor the podcast, please reach out. You can find me and my work at julieharrisoliver.com. If you're looking for simple yet effective tools to bring to your production, or even just want some help in starting to talk about it, give me a call. I'd love to work with you. Thanks for listening. See you next time.